What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football Sports Talk Radio. I'll be your host and producer for this episode, Logan Landers. And joining me here today to do NFL Week 15 game preview between the Chicago Bears and the Minnesota Vikings is the one, the only Mr. Brian LeBel. Brian, how you doing this afternoon, man?
Doing pretty good. Trying to stay warm. It's getting a little cold here. So, yeah.
It is getting chilly. It is December here in Georgia. It's around 30, about 35 or so. So we are starting to dip in temperatures. But, what better way to warm up than being cozy up by the fire, get you a nice blanket, and watch some football here. And that's what we're here to do, discussing, of course, the Monday Night Football matchup between the 4-9 Chicago Bears going on the road to Minnesota, hoping to get their first road victory of the year against the 11-2 Minnesota Vikings, who we'll talk about what they did to the Falcons. We went into an extensive discussion about it on our Falcons report. If you want to hear more perspectives on that, go check that out. But we're here to talk about their next game here. So let's talk about this, Brian. Let's go ahead and talk with the, of course, Caleb Williams-led Chicago Bears. How do you think that they've been doing so far this season? 4-9, but they did have the number one overall draft pick. Did you expect them to be in better rankings and better standings than at this point?
I think when you look at how good the defense is, and I think you look at the expectations of Caleb Williams, they have a pretty good receiver group. The tight end room is good as well. I think the fans, you're always going to have a higher expectation than what is realistic. And, of course, you have to play the games because you never know. It's not one on paper. You win it on the field. Coaching has been an issue. Obviously, we know that because they've moved on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I saw this division being as strong from top to bottom. When you look at how good Minnesota's been, which we'll get to them obviously in a second, Detroit might be the best team in the league. Green Bay's right there with both of them. I just think Chicago, unfortunately for them, they could be a middle-of-the-pack NFC team, but they got to play the Vikings twice. They got to play the Lions twice. They got to play the Packers twice. And as far as where they are now, they're not at that level. Having a rookie quarterback will kind of do that to you. But I think the big underlying issue for the Bears is their offensive line just isn't there yet. It's not as good as Detroit's. It's not as good as Minnesota's. It's not as good as Green Bay's, which is a common theme for them. And I would say that's probably the glaring weakness on their team. And when you have a rookie quarterback with a bad offensive line and uncertainty at coach, it's 4-9 is probably about where you're going to see yourself at this point in the season.
This is a ball club who's looking to pick up their first win since October 13th. So it's been quite some time. It's been after this game, or before this game's played, it's been 2 months since they won a ball game. They have won a road game all season. And the game that they did win, they were, I guess you could say, technically the home team, because they were in London facing off against the Jacksonville Jaguars was their last win. Since then, it's just been rough. I mean, they are just trying to scratch and claw their way back into the win column, because let's not forget the fact that before they've hit this just awful 7-game spread here, a 7-game losing streak, they were at one point 4-2. So they did have a winning record.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of all fell apart with that Commanders loss that we know, which was rough. They lost 18-15, a winnable game.
Yeah.
And I mean, they to be fair though, they've played close games. Not every one of them, of course, but ones that they could have won. They lost 20-19 against Green Bay. They lost 23-20 against Detroit, and they also lost 30-27 against the Minnesota Vikings just a couple of weeks ago. So while yes, the losses are there, they are playing better in some aspects, right? That we talked about the other day with Carolina. And yeah, they are 3-10, but they have looked a lot better in recent weeks than what their record indicates. So I think Chicago, I mean, like I said, they're coming off a loss this past week. They got absolutely just beat up by San Francisco, which I didn't think that San Francisco was going to put the hurt on them like that, considering they had backup running backs, and not just your second string running back. They had guys from the practice squad out there, and they just couldn't stop them. Like you said, just the defense for Chicago just did not come to play. And when you look at some of their big guys, obviously Caleb Williams, number one overall draft pick, he's going to have all the hoopla around him, whether that be good or bad. But on the season, respectable numbers: 2,746 passing yards, 16 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions, so he keeps it clean. But some areas he can improve. Completion percentage is only 62.2%. That's a little bit low. Definitely can bump that up. But also, like you said, Brian, the main issue with this team is the offensive line. Your number one overall quarterback has been sacked 56 times this season.
Yep.
And we still got a couple of games left to play. He'll definitely beat 60. No doubt about that. But I mean, it's just been rough for this Chicago team, as you mentioned. They let go to Matt Eberflus a couple of weeks ago. Sometimes that will spark a change in the locker room and get them back in the winning circle, but that just hasn't been the case. Still a little bit of time to turn it around, but this is ultimately, when it's all said and done, probably a team that's on the outside of the playoffs looking in. But like I said, they were the number one overall selection, so we knew that there were issues that this team had coming into this season. Some other key players, obviously, DeAndre Swift, 742 rushing yards, but he only averages 3.8 yards per rush. Once again, you can also credit that to the O-line as well. If you don't have any time to find the holes, you're not going to get anywhere. So a bit of a down year for him as well. He does have 5 touchdowns, though, so good on that. But receiving core, DJ Moore, he's your top guy. And Rome Odunze, he's put up solid numbers, I think, in his first year. Obviously, that was the big talk coming into this team in 2024 was Rome Odunze being, of course, drafted out of Washington, very highly touted wide receiver, great hands. And then, of course, Caleb Williams, who did his thing for many, many years in college, and the connection they would have. And you've seen it in spurts. It hasn't been that, number one to number one connection like you're hoping. But like I said, it's still early. They're still rookies, so there's still time to work out any kinks they may have. Rest of your team, though, like I said, where it all kind of falls apart to is defense. They've got 31 sacks on the team. The main guy for that being Gervon Dexter Sr. He's got 5. That's leading the team. They have a bunch of other guys with 1 or 2 just kind of thrown in there, and they just can't stop anything. It feels like at times they go times where they look solid in certain drives, but then they just give up a ton of points. They average their offense 19.5 points a game. They gave up only 21.4. So I mean, those are respectable numbers. That's not awful. We've definitely looked at a lot worse. But it's just been rough sledding for Chicago, and like I said, they've just been on this awful losing streak. Hoping he can snap it, but we'll go ahead and flip and talk about a team who is red hot, like you said, a team that's also in their division there in the North, and that is the Minnesota Vikings. And Brian, do you want to give your thoughts on what the Vikings did to the Atlanta Falcons, the hometown team, of course, we're broadcasting from, and they just they were the better team. There's no question about that.
Well, I'd say the second half, it looked like they were running 7-on-7 drills out there, the way the offense was. I mean, Sam Darnold put 5 touchdowns? I think his completion percentage was north. It was right around 75%. I mean, it was everything. He couldn't stop anything. The first half looked okay. I mean, if that's one of the best teams in the league, the Falcons played with them in the first half, but then they showed you why, hey, we're right there with Detroit as far as the top dogs of the NFC in the second half. The job that they've done top to bottom as far as kind of keeping everything together, because Kirk Cousins obviously leaves and the question marks are, okay, what are we going to do? You draft J.J. McCarthy, say, okay, he's our kid of the future, and then immediately he gets hurt. Now, what are we going to do? And Sam Darnold, a guy he's been shipped around to 3 different teams and said, hey, he can't start for us. He struggled. And he comes in and I'm not going to put him in an MVP conversation, obviously. I don't think he's quite there. But last week he played as good as maybe anybody not named Josh Allen. So I think you kind of have to give him his flowers for that. They've run the ball pretty well. Aaron Jones has had a pretty solid season. Jordan Addison looks like maybe the best number 2 wide receiver in the NFL. Justin Jefferson, obviously he's still Justin Jefferson. The only guy who has more receiving yards than him right now is Jamar Chase. The defense under Flores has been fantastic. It's been fantastic. A lot of different exotic schemes. They create turnovers. We saw it last week. I mean, Kirk Cousins didn't have a passing touchdown in his homecoming against them, and he had a couple of errant throws where you're looking at it like, would have played. A couple of interceptions. I mean, the defense is good. They're very good. Top to bottom, there's not a lot of weaknesses in this team, and it's kind of the opposite of Chicago, really, where kind of the Bears were kind of right there, as you were saying, in the mix of things. Just 2 months ago, they were in the same conversation with them, and now they've kind of faltered, and the Vikings have kind of done the opposite. They've kind of rocketed the other direction, and they're right on the heels of the Lions. The reason why the Lions still have to keep playing the way they are is because Minnesota's right on their tail.
Yeah, I mean, it's safe to say there's going to be 2 representatives from the North in the playoffs, it looks like. Because, like you said, regardless of if it's Minnesota or if it's Detroit who wins the division, whichever team does not win that will be in a wild card game. That's pretty much, you can lock that in, it feels like, at this point, with just how well they've played. But yeah, Minnesota, I'll say it again, like I did in the Falcons report yesterday, that anytime you can outperform Justin Jefferson, that impresses me. And that's what Jordan Addison did. Just beat him by like, I think 1 yard, but still he looked like a true, that was like a coming out party, I believe I said, because let's not forget USC, this guy was tremendous. He was just unmatched. I believe he won the Blitnikoff Award, a lot of accolades around him, and then got off to a slow start in the league, but you're starting to see now he's starting to really pick it up, which is dangerous. And that's why Sam Darnold has looked so good. Like I said, it obviously helps that you have Justin Jefferson, which everyone can argue, is he the number one wide receiver in the league? Is he number two with Jamar Chase? That's going to go on forever.
Yeah.
But with the addition of Addison and how well he's done, that's just kind of taken this offense to bigger heights. And like you said, Aaron Jones is a quality pickup that they got the all season. They got him, of course, from their rivals in Green Bay, but he's looked good. He's close to 900 yards on the season running, 4 touchdowns, but he's more so just kind of we'll get you a first down here or there. But Sam Darnold, that's who we're running the offense through. Which, I mean, look, if you would have told me that before the season started, like I said, I would have said you're crazy, because he was a backup coming into this year. It was going to be J.J. McCarthy, of course, the quarterback out of Michigan, who had won the national title and all this. And a lot of people were kind of scratching their heads saying, why the heck would they draft him so early on? I mean, things work out for a reason, right? Unfortunately, J.J. got hurt. Best wishes to his recovery still, and hopefully he can come back healthy. But I don't know if he's going to have that starting job when he comes back. Because of just how well Sam Darnold has done. I mean, that's questions for the offseason maybe, but I've been thoroughly impressed with how well Sam Darnold's played. Outperformed Kirk Cousins last week, obviously. He had the 5 touchdowns. But with Minnesota, too, I think a lot of people look at the offense, look at the flashy names and whatnot, but their defense is also pretty solid, Brian. They have a lot of heavy hitters on defense. As a team, they have 40 total sacks in the season. It's mostly by 3 guys that carry the bulk of that. It's going to be Jonathan Greenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, and Pat Jones II. So you got those guys combined. So when you look at the numbers, Greenard has 9, he has 10, Van Ginkel has 9, and then Jones has 7. So those guys are they know how to get to the quarterback. They can get some pressure, and it's a thing of beauty to watch. They also have some demons out there in the backfield. They got some great guys picking off the ball. They have 20 interceptions on the season. So their defense is just locked down, and their offense is doing great. There's a reason Minnesota's look so good this year. Even putting in, you could even say, quote unquote, a backup quarterback in Sam Darnold. They've got just tremendous weapons around them, and they're utilizing them to the best of their ability. That's why they have the record they're in right now. So they've looked great. But, Brian, let's get our final thoughts, our predictions. How's this game going to go? Will Chicago break their losing streak, or will things continue to roll out there in Minnesota?
Well, it's a very tough place to go play. They have a really good group of fans, especially when Minnesota is good. I think it's a division game, and the Bears kept it close earlier. I think the division games are always close. You kind of throw hey, this team's the best at this team's the worst. You kind of throw that out the window when you got 2 teams that play each other twice a year, because there's a little extra oomph. Hey, we don't like these guys, and especially if the Bears are like, hey, if we can play spoiler, and we can kind of come out, maybe knock them down a peg and say, hey, we're still here, right? You still got to prep for us as much as you want to catch the Lions, as much as you got to stay in front of the Packers. We're still part of this thing too. But the way Minnesota's playing right now, it's really, really difficult to see Chicago coming in and winning this game. So I think Minnesota wins the game. I think it'll be closer. I think it'd be more maybe like a 27-21 type of game, but I think Minnesota takes care of business.
Yeah, respectable numbers. Like I said, you're always going to want to fight harder against your division rivals. Chicago, they're looking to just kind of play spoiler for personal pride right now, and for Minnesota, you're fighting for to keep your impressive record, to soar into the playoffs, and hope no one gets hurt. That's the kind of the MO for both these teams. For me personally, I think Minnesota will take this one. I'll go a little bit higher scoring affair. I think Minnesota, they'll put up 30 points. And as for Chicago, I'll have them going 17. I think that Minnesota, they impressed me last week. They've been impressive all year. And I think Chicago does have some good players like we've highlighted, but I just think it'll be a little bit too much for Minnesota, and they'll continue their winning ways. And unfortunately for Chicago, I don't think they're going to snap that losing streak this upcoming week in Week 15. Well, hey, Brian LeBel, appreciate you, man, coming on the show, talking some Monday Night Football. Of course, this game's going to be on 8 o'clock Eastern at US Bank Stadium out there in Minnesota. If you guys want to check this game out on Monday. Well, it's good for Brian LeBel. I've been your host and producer, Logan Landers. Until next time, guys, if you like this episode, like, follow, share, and subscribe, Facebook and YouTube. And until next time, we'll see you again on another live episode.